Hello.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, very loudly. Let me just turn that down.
Oh, turn it down a little bit. There we go.
Hi, hi.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm very, very well. Thank you. Always a little bit better after seeing you.
Oh, even on a Sunday evening, it's
Even on
almost
a
my
Sunday.
bedtime.
Yes. Well, we'll be sure to get stuck right into the juicy things. I know that that's what your specialty is and that's what you love. Um, so thank you. First of all, thank you very much for jumping
My
on with
pleasure.
momentum. Um, Now, for those who don't know who Vashti is, who will be largely obviously from our audience, Vashti is an amazing coach and personal mentor as well to myself and Genoa and Blake. And we've been super fortunate to do some work with Vashti. And I was very fortunate to hear her speak in Fiji last year. And that was when I first became enamored with the Vashti Whitfield effect. And I kind of didn't leave you alone in Fiji, so I don't know how relaxing it was for you last year, but I know I sucked in as much information as I could from you, and I'm sure everyone tonight will kind of get that and will love hearing your thoughts on kind of what makes men attractive, but also what you look for in men, what you have looked for in men, what you now look for now, how it's kind of changed over the years. And we'll kind of just delve really deep into that topic and a little bit of masculinity from the feminine point of view, because, obviously here at Momentum, we are trying to be a better man. We're all trying to be a better man. And part of that is having a conversation with, amazing women such as yourself, where we can, find little blind spots that Blake, and myself, we don't pick up on, and we can go to you and say, what do women look for in men? So with all of that, with our big mouth Phil, Vashti, the first question that I really wanted to ask you was around your previous relationship with Andy Whitfield. So for those who don't know, Vashti was married to Andy. And if you've got a chance to quickly Google him, he's an absolute looker, an absolute superstar, a stud. And Vashti, what drew you to Andy? What drew you into his presence and got you to kind of fall head over heels for him, as I understand?
Okay, I'm just processing some of the information. And
Yes.
hello to all the lovely people that are saying hello to me. I see you, Cole. Sorry, there's lots of funny messages coming up. So as with Insta TV, it's that
Yeah.
challenge with being really present, but also giving attention to those people that are saying
Definitely.
hi. So I'm just going to do a unanimous hello. Mwah, lots of love to all of you, and it's great to be here tonight to be with you, Dylan, and to the boys, Blake and Genoa. A wonderful threesome, if ever there was one. Um, so I think it's an interesting question. So going back to your words, if you didn't know Vashti's late husband, who you neglected to mention, died
Yes.
years ago, very young, in the peak of what one might think of as like the absolute Hollywood dream of having made it from shy little engineer who wouldn't say boo to a goose to finding the confidence to become, an overnight superstar, or at least 7 years going back and forth to LA. Now, so he wasn't just a looker. He was also somebody that was determined and humble and vulnerable and frightened, and also completely unaware of his external beauty. And in fact, was more driven by his desire to overcome his shyness than he was anything else. And so, in answer to your actual question and the context of tonight's conversation and that interesting title, What Women Want, was
Yes.
what drew me to him, which is what happens for many people, is what we're actually drawn to is what we don't have or what we long for. And so when
Mm.
I first met Andy, one of the things somebody said to me, a gorgeous friend of mine, she was like, "Oh my God, you guys get on so well." And I was like, "Ugh, no way. He's like one of those wet, handsome dudes, like, ugh, like lovely guy, but no way, far too wet. I like the real fuckers, you know, the ones that really like stitched you up and, you know, wanted you, but then didn't want you. I just was like, I would go headline and sinker for somebody that was misaligned.
Great taste in men.
Well, it wasn't about taste in men. It was a habit in a lack of self-worth, right? So what was there with me for Andy was I saw a vulnerability and a gentleness and a softness and an absolute self-awareness in terms of empathy and kindness that being drivers for him that were absent in some of the fathering that I had gotten. And so what I saw was balanced and calm, the complete opposite to what I'd had growing up with a father, a mad creative, but very angry and frustrated creative. And so I looked for soft. I was strong and big and rah, and he was soft and beautiful. So I was drawn to the opposite. But interestingly, before I pause and hand back to you, what was fascinating is he was drawn to the big and the strong and the rah because he didn't have that. But in our time together, we actually crossed over to the point of he became strong and I became soft and humble, as you might not realize, and vulnerable. And so those things changed, as they often do in relationships, which is what we're going to talk about later in this conversation.
Yeah. It's super interesting that you say it was his softness, his vulnerability that drew you in, because I know that a lot of men see that as such like a, oh, women don't want that. Women don't want this soft, caring, nice, you know, the cliche of nice guys finish last. And so many men really struggle with showing up in their relationships as vulnerable and as soft and as those really endearing personality traits that you just described. So I think it's really important to touch more and emphasize more on that it can be a really attractive trait and it can be something that draws women in.
Well, I think you've gone forward probably 55 steps. I think if we come back to it, we also need to, before we look at, you know, and I think what I'm hearing you refer to as what women want is a partner or a boyfriend, right? You're not talking about friendship. You're talking about what, from a nature nurture perspective, does a female, if they're going to go for the opposite gender, what is it they are actually attracted? And I think there's a question that goes before that, which is why. And so it's really important to just touch base with oneself, not touch one's base, but touch base and work out, well, what's my relationship with my father? Who have been the pivotal male relationships in my life? How have I observed perhaps my mother or the people that brought me up in their relationships? Because we're not just born and think a certain way when it comes to partnering or wanting to be with somebody. Already we have a fundamental wiring that has us attracted to a certain type of person. And it's and that is an important question to have. To ask ourselves, what is it that I am attracted to and why is it? And is this attraction I actually have to this person like serving me? And the same for men with women. And so this whole piece of vulnerability that you talk about, and it's interesting your choice of words, Dylan, you know, like you use the words, it can be okay to be vulnerable. It's not can be, is. But we don't know how to be. We don't know what vulnerability is. And so what we misunderstand as women and men is we see vulnerability as weakness. We might mistake neediness and say, oh, they're just vulnerable. But they genuinely might be too needy or jealous or have issues over there. It's very different from what we can explore to be vulnerability, which might be a softness, which might be a shyness, which might not be a bravado or like, look at me. And when we go back to the most, which has changed with the evolution of our brains, but when we go back to most fundamental, primal kind of wiring, which is for men particularly, protect, provide, procreate, it's not strange that we're often, as females, or it doesn't really matter whether it's masculine, feminine, or to our partners, to a mate, let's call it. It's not strange that we often look for someone that's going to like protect us. So we might be attracted to the idea of something and the idea of someone, but who they actually are is not what we want. And we often find this in relationships, that people go for something they like, the fantasy, the idea of, but it's actually not what they're after. And so I find this all the time when I'm coaching people around relationships. When they actually look at what they most want, it's actually very different often from the sexual fantasy of what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the reason that I use the term can be, because from a male's point of view, or a human experience point of view, I think that the stories we tell ourselves around vulnerability. So let's say I grow up and I think vulnerability is bad, and then every time I try to be vulnerable, I want to try to back up that statement so that I make myself right. So I think that I've seen, especially in my circles and with men and myself included, is that we're vulnerable with the wrong people. And so it's not necessarily a case that vulnerability is bad. I think it's the people that you're vulnerable with have to earn that right to see you in that vulnerable space. And that's the way that I see it anyway, in terms of like, I'm not just going to open up to anyone because I'm sharing a piece of me that I really value. And I think that other people need to kind of earn that right to see it. Does that make sense?
It does, but if you don't mind me saying so, that comes from a place of either having been stung and or hurt.
Yeah.
There's a lack of trust in that. So to come into a relationship going, you got to earn my trust before I give you vulnerability. We're starting that relationship in an inauthentic place.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're entering into a relationship with somebody where you don't feel that you can be yourself and or share yourself with them, and or they're not opening it up in a way to allow you to be that, I would question up front what it is you're actually entering into and why it is, you know. And again, I come back to this whole place of what's the motive, like what's the intention behind it. Because if Dylan, if you were entering into anything with me, the whole sense would be, how can we have that level of connection and trust from the get-go, regardless of what it is. So I think if we bring it back to the conversation of, you know, what people are looking for in partnerships, it's very different at different ages. It's very different in terms of life experiences, but it's particularly different at certain ages because of you know, what we don't know, what we do know, and what we imagine in a longer term relationship.
And to flow on from that as well, as you stated before, your relationship kind of went from you were the more masculine at saying the piece, and he was the more feminine, and then you guys crossed over, and he became the big roar, as you put it, and you were more vulnerable, needing him to hold the space for you. How does that transition over time? So from your younger self, was that what you needed in a partner? As you said, that you saw that as what you missed from your father, so you looked for the softness, and then when you got into the relationship, it transitioned over time where you needed that more stable, masculine presence in your life? Or how did that kind of transition from what you looked for as a younger self?
I'm just thinking how to answer that in a really clear way for the audience. So I was attracted to the softness and the vulnerability, but I was also attracted to the potential I saw. And as you know, if there's something in there, there's no way you're going to spend any time with me without me going, okay, baby, let's get that out. And for me, what I loved about him was the softness and the vulnerability, but also what I saw lurking just below the surface, right? So the other thing to be really mindful of is that there was a vulnerability there, but there was a courage. So when I said, this is what I'm up for in life, and if you want to come with me on that, this is going to be a stretch because you're going to have to grow. He just said, okay, I'm up for anything. So I think the other thing to be mindful of is what I was deeply attracted to as well was somebody that was open and continued to stay open. And that's what was our relationship. It wasn't an open relationship, but had two open human beings that were like in the pursuit of adventure, learning, and holding space for each other to grow. Now, when you talk about the dynamic of any relationship, we often can come into a relationship and be really aligned, but then one grows and needs the other one to grow. It's almost like passing the button, right? And so we need this fearlessness to go, okay, shit, it's time for a growth spurt, mentally, emotionally, academically, whatever. But one of the challenges that happens in longer term relationships, or even in short term ones, we had this gorgeous girl that came and helped with Jessie and Indy, my two cubs, my kids, a few years back. And she was only young. She was 17, 18. And she had this lovely boyfriend who'd grown up in really tough times. And she was starting to talk about like life beyond studies in Australia and going off and traveling to London and Paris. And he was like, well, why would you want to go there? Why would you want to go anywhere else? And already she started to see what had felt like this very brave, courageous dude, you know, in his hood. Suddenly the fear of life and all those things came up. And so for her, even at 17, and I know this can happen people so young, there was an inability to let her grow. And then a desire to try and control her to stop her growing. Now, that's not gender specific. We see this pattern play out in relationships the whole time. And so when you ask a question about, you know, what women particularly want in a relationship, it depends who that woman is. Does she want somebody who's going to be softer and more vulnerable? Does she want someone that's going to be shit scared, but courageously say, you know what? Let's just sell the house. Let's go on around the world like I don't know where. So it's very much about the individual and where they're at and what they want, which is in how we seek a partner out.
And how important is communication then within any relationship?
Well, this is a really interesting question. So I'd love for you to think about if you imagine a deaf couple where they haven't actually got words, but they've got signing and they've got eye contact and they've got presence. And we look at a vast percentage of communication. It's not through words, it's through body language, it's through actions, it's through how we demonstrate our love, it's how we find different ways of communicating. Without communication, a relationship has three things. At the beginning, it potentially has great sex and intimacy, or maybe just sex, maybe not the intimacy, or maybe both. It maybe has loyalty, and maybe it had love. And what's interesting, the longer we are in a relationship, the more intimate or close it becomes, the less the sexy fantasy stuff stays. Because so much of sex and fantasy and intimacy is about, you know, like somebody that's not real. And the longer we are together, the more complex things, you know, we want to do things together. We might want to invest together. We might have children together. We start to think about big decisions. If we have started a relationship like the one you're alluding to, Dylan, which is you got to earn my trust for me to be able to share myself with you. I'm not, from the get-go, I'm actually not going to be communicating honestly. I'm not going to be saying what I feel. I'm not going to feel brave enough or confident or trustworthy enough to ask questions about someone. So from the get-go, we've already established a relationship that's got very, very minimal communication, whether it's through words or demonstration or most important of all, asking questions and really listening. And I would say that communication is 99.9% everything of a relationship. But communication, as I said, is not just through it's through the listening, it's through the way you're seeing someone and hearing them, it's how you respond to them, how you demonstrate that you've heard them. So it's critical. But one of the things we're not trained to do ridiculously, we're really good, we get taught how to do maths, maybe even Latin if you go to certain private schools, but we're actually not. Yeah, I know you did. But we're not taught how to communicate properly, and we're not taught in a way that enables us, especially in single sex schools, in how to communicate with the opposite sex, which is a dismal education in how to relate.
So within your own relationship, and I am trying to drag this in the direction of, you know, how can both our male and female listeners take juicy nuggets that you give that you're just vomiting out, which I love. It's so good. So how did you have to hold space for Andy to open up more? Was he more inclined to just sharing and communicating? Was it something you two were both really good at, or was it something that you guys you know, had to really work on?
I've always been curious about people, and so asking questions and connecting on a much deeper level have always been just a way for me of existing in the world. So that set a really wonderful tone for our relationship. But also, you got to learn, right? You know, like if somebody isn't, if it's not your natural inclination, and maybe you've got two introverts together, if it's not your natural inclination to ask those questions or to feel a bit uncomfortable doing that, we need to take responsibility for learning how. And given the nature of my work, which I've been doing for, 25 years now, bringing Andy on that ride was very much part of the process. And amongst myself and my friends and my colleagues, we all have a tendency to, obnoxiously communicate in this way all the time, but also to really listen to each other and ask questions pertinent to really connecting with each other. So I think I remember him actually saying, and without disrespecting or honoring his lovely friends, I remember very, very early on in our relationship, him saying, I don't want my friends anymore. I want all yours. Even if we don't work, can I stay friends with your friends? And I said, well, what is it about them? And he said, well, they really talk. Like they really talk, and I really like what we're talking. Like it's rich and it's real and it's interesting. And I think what he meant was we're actually talking about real things, not just observations of life or other people, but that level of connection. There are, and I just want to put this there for the audience. If you haven't seen them, although unfortunately since COVID, they've closed the offices, but if you don't know it, The School of Life. So The School of Life originally started by Alain de Botton, who's written so many fantastic books, many on relationships. If you go online, this is online. If you go online to their store, I think it's still active in Australia, but you can buy them from around the world. They have these amazing question cards, which are incredible for a first date or in massaging and getting to know each other in a relationship, or even into a relationship. You pick a card.
Actual massaging or
no massaging?
No massaging.
No massaging. This is away from that, Dylan. I was trying to have a conversation that actually opened up the mind and connection.
Okay, good. No, I want to be clear. The communication piece, I'll make sure we're communicating clearly.
Right. So if you take out one of these cards, it will ask a question like, what is it that you're most scared of? And so you would share that, and then you would have a conversation about it. And that's the whole point. Those are the type of questions that we go, oh my God, am I supposed to be 6 months in before I ask a question? Those are the types of things where we really get to know someone. And we also get to see whether there's somebody you want to continue to spend time and or build a relationship with, or just have a brief experience with.
Yeah, which is totally fine as well.
It is as long as it's self-nurturing. And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. You know, when you think about in the age that we are in of easily accessible, very quick interactions, it's very easy to tell yourself that that's what you want. And so I always challenge that point. Free reign to do what you want with your body, with your life, and to be mindful where you are looking for something through sex and intimacy that you are absolutely not getting.
Yeah. I love that. That's good. So as your relationship progressed, how did, what you looked for in Andy or in that male presence in your life? What did you look for as he became a father?
Okay. So two quick things on that. One, like, just bear in mind in front of you, you have a woman who was wildly promiscuous as a young woman, who then fell in love with her best friend and partner, made 2 amazing babies, was married to pretty much like I literally would get mobbed by women and men and occasionally dogs when they saw Andy on the street, who then died. And then you've got this relatively young widow, out there on the scene again. So maybe also I'd be mindful as to like, you can also dive into that as well, because there's some juicy conversations there around what different levels of men and ages and women are looking for at different times beyond my marriage before.
But in terms
of your question though, which was, what did you look for in a father? This is a really great question, Dylan, because I talked about this earlier. We can be very attracted to the idea of something when we're younger because it's sexy, it's strong, it's confident, they're confident, they are funny, any of those things. Maybe they're affluent, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, we start to think about babies and producing, and things can shift a little bit. You know, I've known people wildly in love with, like, you know, the struggling, brilliant artist, playwright, wannabe actor who have sadly, and when I say sadly, like it's been a heartbreak for them, but consciously done a full 180 and gone for the lawyer and gone for the barrister, gone for the accountant, not because they aren't gorgeous people too, but because they go, that aligns with what I want now in terms of my safety, in terms of the secure, stable income, predictable. And so it's interesting because for me, in terms of looking at what I wanted, I wanted somebody like everything in life. I wanted someone that was going to be my partner in crime. I would never have had babies on my own. And I think it's wonderful when women do it. I would never have been someone that froze my eggs and made babies later. It was like we're doing this together. This is us making little people together. It was a conscious choice. And all I looked for was somebody emotionally intelligent enough to parent our kids in a creative, loving, adventurous, but also stable way. So, you know, there are plenty of bad boys and naughty boys and brilliant creatives who I see out there in the world still living the same life. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted somebody who could have the emotional intelligence to recognize how and what was going on for them and be able to parent in that same way. Yeah,
amazing. And I do want to delve into what you just flagged for me, and I do want to delve into the post Andy part. I've got one more question. It seems like you've mentioned it a few times now where the partner grows and then the other partner grows, and you just mentioned again that alignment piece that you and Andy shared and had. It seems very much that for any relationship to flourish and for anything to continue long term, that the growth together, whether it is that separate and then separate, and as you kind of outlaid, is super, super important for the longevity and the success of the relationship.
Yes, I mean, look, well, I will share with you this. So when we were filming the show Spartacus, and we had two very young babies. We'd gone in like a heartbeat. We'd left Sydney. We'd sold our house. We'd moved to, it was going to be Canada or LA or Auckland in New Zealand. And I was like, woohoo, I'm moving to Canada. Oh, we're moving to LA. And we moved to Auckland to 12 weeks of rain. And so alone, and I am not the stay at home with two little tiny babies in the middle of muddy countryside kind of a chick, but suddenly I was. And my best friend, who I'd been inseparable from for many years, was suddenly a loincloth wearing, six-pack, sword wielding action. Well, you know, he was Spartacus and he was gone. And all of a sudden, what we had known just went, and I had a role and he had a role. And you talk about alignment, and that was the first time ever there was a misalignment taking place. And I'm answering your question in a long-winded way. And it was interesting because people kept saying, am I allowed to swear? How the fuck do you handle this? You're like gorgeous husband rolling around with, no offense, but much hotter women than you, like with boobs and kissing and sex. And doesn't that do your head in? And it was interesting because that never concerned me at all. But what the problem was there was a lack of intimacy because we were completely, we were away from each other almost all day, every day. And I'm at home doing this and he's at home doing this and he's wanting me to support him and read all his scripts and be there for him. And there was just nothing left of me, right? So what starts to happen is there's a misalignment. He's growing and I'm growing, but we're kind of growing differently, even though we think we're on the same path. Now, this is where, and this is a really important thing for all to hear. If you are serious about your relationship, if you really love each other, there has to be a willingness to come to the table and not see the issue as broken, but the opportunity to grow.
Mm.
Because in any relationship where friction starts to occur for the couple that have been together for a wee while, it's only ever, like everything in life, it's an opportunity to grow. And you've got to
Yeah.
decide whether you're going to grow together or you're going to grow apart.
Yeah.
And so, again, you asked that wonderful question, how important is communication? Well, communication was everything, but also
Yeah.
courage was everything. And being clear
Yeah.
about what your own personal values are so that you can communicate them to your partner was critical. So it was
Yeah.
a time for me where I loved him so much, but I loved my children so much, and I could see it not going in alignment with our core values, where I had to front up and say, either you're up for dealing with this, or I'm courageous enough to step away from this. And of course, for him, it was a non-negotiable. So we did the work, and we worked
Yeah.
through it, and
Yeah.
we ended up doing the same stuff, and it was all, all back in alignment, but we needed to do the work. And it's also being okay, not being okay for a little while, but also having the commitment to the bigger picture. Because if one
Yeah.
of you isn't committed and is going off over here, that's where the growing apart starts to
Yeah.
take place. And that's a whole other juicy conversation
Yeah.
that can be had about, and again, this is not in relationship to my relationship, but that's where often couples I work with in sports and entertainment industry, when you're away for long periods of time, or in working intimately together with somebody else, that's
Yeah.
where it often can be misunderstood, that intimacy for connection. And that's
Yeah.
where, other encounters can happen with somebody else. But,
Yeah.
I come back to this place that, like, where there is friction, it's time to
Yeah.
grow. You just have to decide whether that's together or apart.
Yeah. And I love it. You mentioned, like, we're massive on values here, and we've done, obviously, as you know, we've done value work with you, and that piece that you keep bringing forward is being in alignment with your partner, but also that personal piece of, well, I need to be in alignment with my own values within this relationship. And if it gets to that point of, well, my internal values now are no longer serving myself within this relationship, or the relationship is no longer serving my internal values, there is that, like you said, that courageous piece of going, hey, I still love you, or whatever it is, but it's my turn now to step away. So really love that.
Well, also, and I would say this to even if you're in a place of like seeking a new partner, or even a date, or even someone you want to like have a physical relationship with, and pretty much that's it, but you would like a decent conversation at the end of being naked, it is so important to understand what values are. Values are not goals. Values are filters for what is most important to you. And you can have different values for a relationship, you can have different values for career, but there are overall I call global values. If you in a relationship, you need to sit down and work out what your unified values are. So we always, Andy and I, and even in my really good friendships, we talk about what our core values are. And in my relationship with Andy, we always regularly, like literally, we would like insanely committed to the process of, well, what are our core values? What values might we need to bring in to kind of reach certain goals, or to foster our relationship more? And so we always had three values that we filtered everything through. And it was critical that even though it might mean different things for both of you. So for example, one of our core values indefinitely between Andy and I was adventure. And so for him, adventure meant he also needed to go off-road and mountain biking and motorbikes. Whereas for me, adventure meant travel. For me, adventure meant study. It used to mean something in my younger years, but so we learned to see how we fed each other's need, but under the same value. And that keeps a relationship in phenomenal stead. But the other thing I do want to say there, it's so important to remember that your values do change. So when you start to find that there's something going on, perhaps one of you's grown, perhaps one of you valued security, which meant a job, a great job in a bank, a mortgage. And then perhaps one of you loses a parent or something like that. And all of a sudden it's like, well, fuck this security value. I want adventure. I don't want to. And all of a sudden there's a clash because our values misalign. And that's where there's this juicy opportunity to, as a couple, look at, well, why is it that you value that? Is it something that's actually courageous, or is it a value that's based out of fear? And that's a whole other conversation.
It is. I know, and I'd love to go more in depth on the value piece, because I think there's just so much like as you said, juicy info around that. And instead of doing that, I will throw to a question that you got in the chat. So if I can kind of scroll back up, how do you start the conversation when you can feel like one is more out of alignment than the other? I think is the question. Yeah.
It's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question. Look, one of the best pieces of communication we can use is asking questions. But how we ask that question is really critical. And Dylan, you talked about that piece at the very beginning about, you know, you kind of got to win or earn my trust for me to feel safe and be vulnerable with you. Yeah. I call it setting the scene. You know, one of the most fundamental basic human needs is to trust somebody, to share yourself with them. Or, you know, that's what we do as human beings. In less than 2 seconds, we've already worked out whether we trust somebody or not. So to ask a question, like if you do feel like there's a misalignment, it's important to be able to set the scene as to why you might want to ask a certain question, you know, like, and to set clear intention. And so, for example, and I know this might not be specific to you or the way that you communicate, the person that asked the question, but it might be something like, you know, I share an acknowledgement about what you do love about the relationship or what you do love about that person. You know, like, I just wanted to say that this relationship brings so much to me, or I love the way that this happens, or it has to be authentic, right? So you've got to find something and then set intention. And I want to make sure that we are both wanting the same things, and I want to find out how we can do that for each other. So I want to ask you a question, and then ask a question based around where you feel there might be misalignment. The important thing is not to do it in accusatory or blaming manner, to do it in a way that it is a conversation. But if you just launch straight in and someone's not ready, that can break trust. So it's setting it up in the right way and doing it with authenticity. But the question, ask a question, but then make sure you listen to the answer. Because if you think it's something already, or you have an agenda that it's something already, you're going to be listening to hear that. So super important that when they actually share that with you, if you haven't got enough, ask another question. And if they had said something, make sure that you give back to them what you've heard, to make sure you've heard them correctly. And that's a whole other module we can do on communication with momentum later.
Yes. I think also, like, that question came in before you touched on the value piece in detail. I think also setting up the values in the relationship really allow the relationship to flourish, because you have almost like, as you said you both had the adventure value. But so if I'm in a relationship with you and you're telling me that you want more adventure, and I'm going off and taking you mountain bike riding and going, but I'm giving you adventure, you're going, yeah, but that's not my adventure. I want to go and travel. So I think that's like such a key part in the relationship, having the values and going the step below the values of, well, what does that value mean for you? Because I can be showing up in the relationship and going, well, what the fuck? Why is Vashti on my case about adventure? We're going mountain bike riding every day. Like, there's so much adventure, and you're going, I want to travel. So, you know, help us out here.
There's a book as well that's been around since year dot. I've got it somewhere behind me. And it's called The 5 Languages of Love. Very fundamental, basic, but it talks about how we express love in different ways. And when I say love, I don't mean like, darling, I love you, but that might be one way. But we all do that differently. So, I was talking to a client the other day, and they were talking about how there are certain behaviors that they don't show up and do, and their partner gets endlessly frustrated. But they were saying, and I do this, and I do this, and I bet and it's like, it doesn't matter. That's not what they're looking for. Like, maybe you need to ask them that you want acknowledgement for that, but that's not that's not what they're asking for. So it's also creating, though, the safe place to be able to have those conversations. If we're very reactive, if we take things personally and we take them as criticism, we're not making it very easy to actually advance our relationship or allow our partner to find out what we do want. Yeah,
exactly. And that I recommend to all my friends that book, and you can do like the online tests to find your own love language, and it actually is a game changer in relationships, because you're then going, oh, okay, she is or he is showing me love, because I just wasn't looking for it before. I couldn't
Mm.
see it because I received love this way, and they were giving it to me in a different way. So I do recommend either doing a little online quiz or getting that book for sure.
Yes.
Now, single Vashti, how has that journey been? And first of all, how long have you been single Vashti for now?
So first of all, I don't ever talk about myself in third person,
No, of
and
course not.
I also don't ever use the word single because
Right.
I just never use that word. Because I will be eternally married to my late husband, and he's not floating around. I don't believe in ghosts, but he is like intrinsically a part of me, and he is my rudder.
Mm.
And so I always think of myself still as married to
Yeah.
somebody, but in terms of actually living with a physical partner,
Yeah.
so there have been some really interesting, like it's been the most phenomenal learning curve, having done the first part of my life as a young woman, and um, navigating and looking for love in all the wrong places, but also having a great time and loving sex and unashamedly enjoying that as a young woman, and then falling madly in love and being with that one person, having a very rich and loving intimate relationship. And so after Andy died, it's interesting because I am a very physical woman, and so for me, if I'm not like running really fast on the soft sand, I've got to work that energy off somewhere, right? And so at the beginning, there was this sort of interesting, very disconnected, but very real need to have a physical connection with another human being. And so, I'm going to share this very openly because, as we all know, I share everything. I remember a
Yes.
really good friend of mine saying to me, I mean, you seem to know that barista, that coffee maker, that waiter, the baker, like everyone in like a 50-meter radius of my house. You know them very well. How do you know them so well? And I just kept very, very quiet. But the point being was,
You there?
I got my needs met. But then what I started to realize was that, and I don't know if this is pertinent to your audience, but as a mother to two amazing kids, I went into that automatic pilot of trying to block their experience of loss. And so I
Right.
instantly started to look for a partner that might be a good father, that
Mm.
might fit the thing, and instantaneously attracted another, 6 foot, beautiful, kind, gentle, lovely, gorgeous softie, like a Great Dane. But in that moment of bringing this person into our life, realized that I was so not ready to
Yeah.
be with anybody, right? Not ready. Now, a lot of people at that stage would have repartnered, and nobody could understand why I let this person go. It was another one like, you do realize how you look and how he looks, right? Like, I mean, what's the deal? How have you got this dude again? And,
Yeah.
but the thing I want the audience to hear was that I didn't have a fear of being alone. And I didn't
Mm.
have a fear of doing it alone because it felt more lonely being with somebody for the sake of being with somebody out of fear than it did doing it solo. And
Yeah.
so that's where I just chose actively to go on this kind of, I'm going to use the J word, this journey in like understanding what was my relationship with men. Like,
Yeah.
how had I pre Andy and then post Andy, how was I reacting to men? What was I trying to prove? What is it I wanted? What didn't I want?
Mm.
And it was really challenging, but incredibly like life changing experience of being able to go into a room and not try and be sexy or not try and win someone's attention, or to be okay with the fact that, will I ever be in a relationship with someone and not know? And so that confidence that it gives you, even if you do feel like you want to snuggle someone, or you do feel like you want to share something with someone, to be okay with not being okay is the most empowering thing I
Mm.
could possibly find.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the being okay, not being okay piece is such a big piece for everyone. It's such a hard journey to go down and kind of conquer.
Mm,
Um, and I think the messaging now, we're so bombarded with that message in particular, and it's okay to be okay. But actually being able to do it and actually sit in that is actually very difficult. It's very easy to repost, like repost a quote, whatever it is, but embodying that, okay, oh, this doesn't feel great. I'm okay not being okay is really difficult.
I think as well though, Dill, I think the other thing, sorry to interrupt you, is that I'm very lucky because for me, relationship is about deep connection. You know, I think of a physical connection, you know, sexual connection, like to have sexual stimulus is one thing. But for me, as a, you know, a woman in her 40s now, that's a stimulus that I can create. But deep connection and deep intimacy of a mind and that conscious awareness with someone is so much more sexy and important to me now. And so because I get such instantaneous connection and depth of intimacy with my clients and that I work with one-on-one almost every day, I've got these two awesome children. What can happen for me, and I don't think happens to the everyday person, is I get that level of intimacy, not the sexy stuff, that level of connection with my clients that often people don't have in marriages 20 years later. And so I also have to be a little bit mindful for me that there is space or conscious space moving forward to allow something like that in. And as you get older, there's this beautiful, I think it's either Ram Dass or Stephen Levine who talks about, I think it's Ram Dass who talks about, we're all just walking each other home. And when Andy died, I felt like I'd lost a limb and I just was limping for such a long time. And I've got my stride back now. And in the same breath, what I'm looking for moving forward is someone to walk beside, however long or short that is, but someone that you can walk beside interdependently, crossing over but apart. And so what's sexy and beautiful now is the idea of like that companion to go on the next adventure with. Without all the stuff of they need to have this, the car, the house, or they need to have this MBA or this PhD, or they need to be a mindfulness. It's more about who is that person that's going to walk beside you in this like companion space rather than anything else. And that's, again, that's incredibly liberating because you stop looking through biases for this kind of perfect ideal of what someone's going to be.
And you've worked with so many, I mean, like countless amounts of couples, professionals, people, men, women. And so you really do have an established voice in this space. And I think all the gems were coming up on the 45 minutes and it's just Sunday night and I want to get you, you know, tucked into bed. But like what you're saying is just, I think, so simple yet profound because you've done the work personally. You've then seen other people go through similar journeys or go through relationships and you've worked with them professionally and personally. And I just can't thank you enough for sharing all these really just gold nuggets. So thank you so much, Vashti. If there's one question I want to leave kind of the chat on, and I'm trying to word this correctly because I know that language is super powerful. And I know that if I word it incorrectly...
Just go for it. Go for it. Throw it out there, gorgeous.
If you could give one piece of advice or if you could give one piece of advice to the average Joe, to the average man around masculinity and what it means to be a man and how to show up for their partners, what would that be?
Oh, that's a really interesting question.
Leave you on a...
It's something about knowing yourself. Like masculinity and what is deeply attractive and beautiful and sexy is to know yourself. And I know that's a really easy thing, but it's not easy, right? So to have the willingness, the courage, and the bravery to learn about yourself, to have self-awareness, to know that when you are going to become a father or if your partner, your woman looks at somebody else, why does that trigger you? What's going on for you? The more self-awareness you can have about you, of yourself, the more you are free to have the most incredible relationships, the more you're free to fall in love with a woman worthy of you and you worthy of her. And the more incredible you'll be a father, a parent, if you want to be. It's like, it's all about self-awareness and being able to understand, or at least reflect on why, or you do a certain thing or feel a certain way, to give yourself that freedom to be authentic, but to attract somebody that will do the same for you. That's it.
Boom. Mic drop. Vashti Whitfield, thank you so much for your time tonight. I hope everyone...
My pleasure. My pleasure. Over
Thank you so much, and we will chat soon.
Bye. Take care.